Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to chat with you. I think it's like one thing for people to hear about narcissism academically, and it's another
Right.
thing to like actually hear somebody's experience. So,
Yes.
yeah, thank
And I
you.
could actually provide both. I could
Good.
also provide both because I had been in the healthcare space for a while, but I think
Mhm.
what makes it different this time is my story because, the tendency is that the more you know, the more you kind of can get yourself away from certain situations, but that was the case for me, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm very I can't really say excited would be the term because whenever I talk about it, it kind of brings me back. It's pretty fresh, but I'm looking forward to sharing my experience because my motivation is to really have more content out there about how it looks like, how it feels, and so people are more aware and can do something about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Before we jump in, I'd love to hear what makes you you.
Oh no, that's actually a good question because I mean, whenever you go through certain things in life, like shock or something good or bad, you really have to know what makes you you, right? Because like in my case right now, I went through a breakup. I had this sense of like loss of self. And usually what people would say is like, oh, I want to get back to how I was, or I want to get back to me. I want to come home. What does that mean exactly? So
Mm.
for me, if I were to define myself in my own words, I consider myself independent, adventurous. I'm a mix of all sorts of things. And, if I could just really be candid about it, I feel like anything that I could get my hands on, I would. I do love life that way. I do think that we only have one life to live. And so, if I were to talk about my experiences, I had been in the healthcare and tech, in the tech space as well. I started off taking my pre-med course. I graduated. And I told myself, well, if I could save people and land, I might as well do that in water as well. So I ended up taking a rescue diver certification. And I'm like, well, I actually feel calm here. How does it feel if I probably like end up flying a plane? And so I took a student pilot license. So I do my flight hours. So I've got a taste of like almost
Yeah.
everything that I decided to get my hands on. And that's what makes me me. I mean, I don't live in my head. If I want to do something, I do it. I'm a human doing or
Yeah.
and being, of course, but you can be both, right? So that's
Mhm.
how at least I define me. If you ask me the question. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but I'm very curious to see like how being somebody who is so action oriented helped you in your process of getting out of a narcissistic relationship. So I'm sure we'll jump in there at some point. But before we get there, can you share a little bit about your story and your experience with narcissism?
Sure. Um, I got to learn about narcissism. I mean, we briefly touched on that in pre-med, but it's more on the individual level or individual space. So, and you know how it is in school, right? Like sometimes you learn it for the sake of it, and then eventually pop culture happened and you hear it you hear it everywhere.
Mhm.
And I didn't really have any experience of it, if that makes sense. I had been in long-term relationships. I had been in therapy, and just like dating, you can go to therapy for various reasons. You can go for self-exploration. You can go as a couple to kind of like, improve certain skills, or you can go because out of desperation, you need to solve things, right? And all my relationships, this is something that I could definitely say, like all my long-term relationships, I have been in different types of relationships, by the way, and I'm not going to expound on that. But in my long-term serious relationships, long distance, not long distance, um, there's a certain feel, I think. Like eventually you said, I can define love in a certain way, in those relationships. And what made it different in this relationship, like it did really stand out because while it only lasted for a year and a half, um, one thing that I could say about this relationship is that for some reason, our communication skills just, I actually thought it was communication skills. Like he just didn't fit that way.
Mhm.
I consider him to be one of the smartest people I have met. Um, but for my other relationships, we went to therapy to correct our communication, to improve our communication, to kind of like be better at it. I have been long-term relationships, by the way. So which means you don't really, it's kind of like a muscle. If you have all the languages, if you have been living separately, then your communication skills have to kind of compensate for the physical aspect. And so that is one thing that I kind of improved over time, and it worked with my partners. And so fights were not, I can't say they weren't there, but we were able to kind of like revert it quickly. But for some reason, this relationship, it started off really good. It started off really as if I had the best time in my life. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden, I just didn't know, the feeling like, did I really sign up for this? That kind of,
Uh,
because for some reason, the communication doesn't work. But this is the same person that made me feel safe, that made me feel like I'm I was put on a pedestal. All of a sudden, I'm like somewhere else. I think that's the easiest way to kind of explain it. It was different in so many ways, so that when you're in it, it just feels like it felt like a storm for me. Um, it felt like a storm for me, but I was holding on to those best moments in my life. And I didn't have that in those in my past relationships, if that makes sense.
yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm hearing a few things, and one being, you know, I see this a lot with couples that I work with in therapy where, they come in saying, like, we just got to work on communication and then things will be fine. And you find that there's actually a lot more beneath the surface. And if there's a narcissist, like communication skills aren't going to solve anything.
Mhm.
They are
Yeah.
smart and they do know how to play the game really well. And, I'm also hearing you just say, like, gosh, like it felt like everything I wanted at the start. And then all of a sudden, the door was slammed in my face and
Right.
everything felt upside down. And I didn't know how I landed here and just how disorienting that is.
I also wanted to add that, he's in that space wherein he is required to learn social cues, language, if that makes sense. And for me, I have always considered I know my strengths and weaknesses. And so usually how I deal with, I mean, I know my strengths and weaknesses, and if I know I'm weak at something, then I try to better it. So
Mm.
I have that awareness, so to speak. So in that regard, the fact that I regarded him as an expert, I looked at him like, when we started our relationship, I have never felt so connected with a person in my entire life, if I can even say that. We trained together, we draw together. Like I said, I'm pretty much um, I am passionate about life, and I happen to find someone who keeps his body fit because it's more of the discipline, and I have that too. I'm also a pole fit. I do pole fitness too, and I've been doing that for over 4 years. So I do train. I like the pursuit of knowledge. Like I like reading. I like it's almost as if Siri or ChatGPT or like Google has been like my best friend. And now I have this in a person. If that you
Yeah.
know, and I love walks. He told me he likes to hike. Um, he's an introvert as well. I am an introvert. So we had so much things to connect. Um, and so I thought, who wouldn't think that you could actually spend your entire life with a person like this? You could literally have the spark within you, and
Mhm.
rather than looking for that spark somewhere else. And we talked about that too. Like we even have this phrase called "we are the spark," and that means, for some couples, they go to certain, they actually kind of like book themselves to have an experience somewhere in order for them to relive the spark, within
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But for us, the way that we viewed it then was like we were the ones carrying it. We add experience to the experience. So
Mhm.
that's how we kind of like verbalized how we felt towards each other. And I did hold on to that,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden it's like right now when I think about it, there were red flags that glaring even that I didn't even, mind because I was just so into this love cloud, if that makes sense. And so usually what happens is that, okay, so I found this person, and then I kind of like he made me safe. I was looking for someone who could be my space and my greatest adventure. That was what I was looking for. And then I met him, and he kind of like fit the bill in that sense. So,
Yeah. This concept of the spark, I think, is a really interesting one. And especially for people who have had childhood trauma, I think we often like when we're used to intense experiences
right.
and, you know, we eventually grow to be people who kind of seek those. I'm an ultra runner. I love to put myself through random painful experiences, and I don't know why, other than like I thrive
Yeah.
in crisis and I thrive in like high intensity situations.
Mhm.
Um, and it's easy to see a relationship that creates that energizing feel where you feel
Right.
like, oh, there's so much connection, and to confuse a spark for something that's actually chaotic and dysfunctional. But it
You're
feels like chemistry. It feels like
yeah,
chemistry in a relationship. Um, so I'm wondering if you can share a little bit, whatever you feel comfortable with
sure.
around, how has childhood trauma kind of played a role in your initial attraction to this man?
I think when I was so I don't really want to go through like my whole childhood, but if there's anything that I could pick up from it, um, one thing that I look for in a relationship is that emotional connection. Growing up, I could say like, I'm trying to find a word. My parents gave me everything. Like
Hmm.
when I say they've given me everything, like they've given me the best. You want to go to school? I give you the best school. You go to the best school. You want like, you need this, I give you the best of that.
Mhm.
So on a practical level, I have gotten that. But you can't get everything from
Right.
everyone, like someone in that sense. So if there's anything that lacked growing up for me, um, I could have had more of that emotional connection. And I
Yeah.
think when you look for that in a partner or in people that you kind of like come across, and that becomes like a criteria, then
Mm.
you also have like a metric, if that makes sense. So if
Mhm.
you lack that, and if all of a sudden you get it from someone, it's like, oh, this is what I'm looking for. And then all of a sudden you're just all over that person because this is the person who can give you something that you think is important for you. And then in my case, it is the emotional connection. And that is something that I don't feel I can negotiate because
Mhm.
like I said, it's something that you lack, right? And while I can get that for myself, like I said, I love my own company, then I would want to be with someone who kind of does not complete me, but who has that in order for me to feel safe and for me to feel my life as if it were like a greatest adventure.
Mhm.
So at least that's how I could like navigate that question.
Yeah, I mean, just this idea of like, you could have all your physical, practical needs met, and
Right.
when the emotional connection is not there, it does leave a big impact on us and makes it where the narcissist can create this sense of really deep connection and emotional safety. Yeah, we're going to be drawn in, of course.
Yes. I
Um,
also wanted to add, like, so when we met, and I think this is very important because, like I said, I just want to connect it because I said I am looking for emotional connection. Like, that is something that I need in a relationship. Some people, whenever they get into a relationship, they have their intentions, maybe companionship, maybe, like there's like criteria, but for me, it's that connection. When we met, it wasn't part of the plan, but he drove me home, which is like 50 minutes away. And he said that he drove me home because he knew that I enjoy being in my dad's passenger seat.
huh.
Like I like the idea, I enjoy the idea of my dad driving me around because my parents were hardworking parents. And I really remember those times when I get to be with them because they were that busy. They were busy providing for us. That's why we got the best, right? And so he told me that he drove me because of this. That's one. Second, the moment that he drove me, because like when we met, we felt really connected. He started like sharing, things about himself that kind of I associated it as under vulnerability, but okay, that's for another maybe question or conversation. He created a playlist for us. This
Mm,
was like the first date.
wow.
And he started suggesting like a merge name, like Brangelina. And I
Mhm.
kind of like gave suggestions, and we ended up with my suggestion, like my
Mhm.
idea of a name. So all that happened in the first date. So
Wow.
of course, if you are a person looking for emotional connection, you might associate it with something like this. And in my previous relationships, it was calm. You know what I mean? It was slow. It was so the contrast was there.
Yeah. Yeah, there was such an intensity to like
Yes.
how fast things moved, but also the fact that he could pick up on these subtleties about you and
Right.
know like this is how you're going to feel extremely connected. And
Right.
I'm curious, you've mentioned that safety that you felt at the beginning, and that connection.
Hmm.
Now, as you're out of that relationship, looking back on it, what do you see as the difference between that real emotional safety and the kind of safety that he kind of created for you or fabricated?
So one thing I learned about subclinical or pathological narcissism is that there's a lack to an absence of empathy or accountability, right?
Mhm.
And they may or may not know it themselves because they operate from the space of self-protection.
Mhm.
So I guess if I were to answer your question, I think that the empathy or the safety that he had projected me is something that conditional,
Mhm.
uh, because it benefited him. So I pretty much was the supply, and he would usually tell me about how reciprocity is important for him. And now when I think about it, it's more about he would do things to me that would make me feel better, but for as long as it benefits him.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think safety works that way, especially on the emotional, um, space. We started off as feeling so connected, and I just want to divert this into something. Okay, so there was a time like earlier in the relationship wherein he did hurt me, he did upset me, um, and I was waiting for an apology because that is important for me, or at least the acknowledgement. He did not give me that. Instead, he kind of talked about it as if it's not a big deal. He did not apologize. And so I asked him after a day, why didn't you apologize? Like, how do you feel about apologies? And he said that he rationalizes. I did not pick this up. He actually said it like, because I rationalize apologies. And, I need time to reflect in the situation. And if I think about it and say, oh, this situation deserves an apology, I did hurt that person, then I would issue an apology. And if that in that case, I'm sorry. And I'm like, of
Hmm.
course, that time you didn't see it because you already had like a baseline of this person who kind of
Yeah.
thought about the things that make you happy, this and that. And then over that, you would think, okay, maybe that's not so important. But right now that I'm out of the relationship, I'm like, for me, safety means that a person puts the connection over their ego. I think that's how I'm gonna put it. Like,
I love the way you just put that. Yeah.
and that was like a glaring red sign that this is not the type of person who I want to spend the rest of my life with, but I did not see it that way because of the highs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think um I got blinded by the experiences I've had with him. When I say experiences, I'm talking about the being part, being together, hiking together, drawing together, going to the gym together. It's the physical. So I think I got blinded by that. And I kind of disregarded what safety meant for me eventually, which is ego over connection. And towards the latter part of the relationship, there would be situations wherein I tolerated. And when I think about it, I'll give one situation. We had a fight that he darvoed. So basically, all the conflicts happened to be my fault, right? And I wanted to feel safe outside. And I said, can you just please hold my hand? Because, that's like my way to feel that I'm okay. And what he told me, we were in public, like we were out. He told me, you look miserable and sad. I don't want to hold your hand because people might think I'm mistreating you.
Whoa.
I tolerated that situation. And every time I asked for my hand to be held in public, it depends on when. it depends whether or not I had satisfied him. My behavior satisfied him prior. I
Mhm.
tolerated that. Um,
Wow.
I guess to answer your question, emotional safety, to feel emotionally safe with someone is for that someone to put their connection, your connection over their ego. And
Mhm.
apparently, for subclinical or pathological narcissists, the difference between those is more of just the diagnosis. And I could go through the academics of it, that it's pretty much complicated to even have someone diagnosed. The point is, when you have those traits, there are traits that are harmless, but there are traits when altogether it creates relational harm, relational and emotional harm. That's pretty much what happened to me.
Mhm.
So ego, so if a person puts ego over their connection, that is not equivalent to emotional safety for me. That is something that I could verbalize to answer.
Yeah. No, that's such a helpful way to kind of consolidate that idea. And yeah, I love that. And I'm also hearing that just like you had mentioned earlier that you were his supply and narcissists don't feel empathy, and if they do extend themselves, it's for them to get something in return. And then the reciprocity that you hear them asking for is really they want you to meet their need without really the intention of putting that connection first for you.
Right. You asked me earlier what makes me me, and I told you that, I am an independent person. I don't really rely on external validation. It's a bonus for me. And
Mhm.
so also growing up, I got used to doing my best as the bare minimum. So when I get complimented for my grades, for my performance, etc., that's a bonus for me, because for
Mhm.
me, doing the best is my bare minimum. That's how I
Mhm.
operate, right?
Huh. Uh-huh.
And so, of course, there's a flaw in there. Usually, when you don't get it as much, give and receive, right? So, the way that you give it, you kind of give it when it actually means something. Um, so, I entered the relationship with that me. And I got out of that relationship relying on so much validation from him. I became codependent. And if I were to analyze what happened, I knew myself. He got my trust. He got, he made me feel safe. He started projecting his flaws. I mirrored it. And then whatever I mirrored was weaponized against me. Everything became my fault. I started to like, what can I do to make myself better? I started pushing, overextending. I lost myself in the process. I went to therapy because he told me that my anxiety was the third party of our relationship, without acknowledging that how he treats me, how he treated me contributes to it. Like he really would tell me, no, that is your responsibility. You have to stay accountable for it. So I went to therapy for that. And then eventually, and because I wanted to stay accountable, I focused on myself in therapy until my therapist started digging about my relationship. And so I started explaining. And then it was actually my therapist who told me, Kate, I hate to break this to you, but I think you're in a psychological or emotional abuse. And I'm like, what do you mean?
Mhm.
That's pretty much my story. And then I was in denial. I pushed both of us to therapy because I was like, no, this is just communication issues. This person is like the best when it comes to communication for me that time. And I love this person. It's kind of like, when you hear that word abuse, that is a strong word, but that also nullifies the relationship I had with him. And I just can't, because it felt so real, right? Pushed both of us to couples therapy. And then we had a discard. He discarded me. And the person who discarded me during the therapy, that wasn't the person I fell in love with. Like it just felt to me that like the mask just fell off. Like,
Mhm.
so if I were just to kind of do a flow chart of what happened to me, and yeah, like when we started our relationship, I never talked about looks, by the way. I never talked about looks, image, anything. I talk about what is important for me, family, connection. It had always been connection. 3 months in, he started asking me, do you even find me attractive? And I'm like, of course I do. I tell you that you're attractive. And I think that time he already got my, trust and what. So
Mhm.
he was like, yeah, but I mean, whatever you think matters to me, and it matters to me when I hear this, that, etc. And I think by stage two, you're already in this phase where I just want to love him better. And that's when you start doing things, kind of like negotiating with, that's when the cognitive dissonance happens.
Mhm.
So So I ended up like telling him that he looked good. Ended up like praising him every day. I even had like a mental note. Have I even complimented him today, etc. Because he would always like, there would be times when he would tell me my praise isn't enough,
Hmm.
you know? And for me, and then he would praise me back to the point, or he would give me compliments. At first you would think it's genuine, but towards the end, I started to feel like maybe he's just complimenting me because of reciprocation as a value, that he
Yeah.
needs it.
Mm.
So I changed. So I
Mm.
just wanted to add that, you don't really get to see it unless you're probably out. Because if you think about it, if people called you out or gave them their impression while you were in it, you wouldn't even believe them. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
And there's a big risk in believing. I mean, for your therapist to say, hey, this is abuse, like that was shattering to hear that. And it it means that everything that you knew up to that point just got turned on its side and now you're
Right.
seeing
I wasn't
through a
ready.
different lens. Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back a little bit because you had used a term that I would love to hear you kind of expand upon, because
Sure.
not all of our listeners might have heard this term before, but you had said DARVO. Can you explain what that acronym is?
So DARVO is deny, attack, reverse. Oh, wait, hold on. Reverse victim and offend.
Hmm.
So, so Darvo, right? So this is actually how it happens, and I'm going to give an example because it's easier to give an example.
Hmm.
So in the relationship, he had told me that he intended to marry me, build a family, that I was like the love of his life. He's never felt the same way before with anyone, this and that, right? And I was cleaning up. I was cleaning up the house, and I found post-it notes laying around like in a room. It was on a box. I actually looked at it, and basically the post-its that I saw was from his then relationship, and it indicates otherwise. So basically, the things that he claimed that was just for me, well, he pretty much, it was from the woman, but the woman in the post-it notes, like the notes were something about building a family, using his last name, those type of things. So of course, you would assume that a woman wouldn't, say those things if she wasn't led to actually think the same. So I
Right.
came up to him and told him, you know what, I saw these notes. I feel that, maybe you could, maybe you've lied, this and that, because, a person wouldn't think this way. So that was more, I was upset. I was upset.
Yeah.
And the way that he turned the conversation was, isn't that how so he reasoned out, it's, whatever you did, ask anyone else, like everyone else, they would think that it wasn't right for you to even look. So that one, it's not a big deal. People would go into relationships thinking that that's their intention, even though he said he's never, said those words to anyone. Um, and he started blaming it on me, blaming it in a way that, yeah, but what about you? Now I don't trust you because you end up like invading my privacy, this and that. So over my lie, he covered it with his distrust towards me. The conversation lengthens to the point that I would feel that, oh my God, maybe this is my fault. Maybe I'm overreacting, maybe, and then I end up apologizing for the whole conflict. But he would keep that conversation under, that was my fault.
Mm.
So if I were to summarize my relationship, Darvo as a term, I was Darvoed the whole relationship.
Yeah.
He had never apologized. He probably apologized only 4 times, but was conditional, and it's because he darvoed a conversation. I apologized, then he apologized, but that's not how it works, right?
Yeah.
So that is a form of manipulation. Um, and that is something that I have learned to vocabulary, like to actually use that vocabulary. I did not even, I don't
Mm.
know, I feel shameful to be honest, because I've studied and like, um,
Mm.
so Darvo is a term, it is a tactic, it is a manipulative tactic that is used by your perpetrator for you to question your reality, for you to kind of blame yourself, for you to feel guilty. And that results to you kind of having cognitive dissonance eventually, because you had your values, you had like, what do you call that? You had your thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors. and all of a sudden it kind of like doesn't match to, reality, so to speak. And so you question because you associated your feelings of safety and when you put someone in a pedestal to this person. So I think
Yeah.
that's the best way for me to kind of explain that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a helpful term. And just to speak to some of that shame that you mentioned, like, oh, I feel shame for even not seeing this. It's like when you're in it, first of all, it's almost like a frog being boiled in water. Like it's such a slow progression of
Right.
manipulation that it's like you don't know when you're just, being boiled alive because you've been in it in such a it's been such a tactful, slow process. And you could study it all you want, but the amount of blame shifting and gaslighting that happens makes it so hard for you to even believe yourself in the moment that, is this it? Like, I don't even know. And I think that's why it's so valuable to hear
Mhm.
voices like yours, where it's like, hey, let me just share a story. Let me tell you what it was actually like, rather than, this is academically what a narcissist is. Because I think some of our
It doesn't have
listeners
to
will
be.
feel that and resonate with you.
And so I'm in threads right now. So I'm in school. I went back to school while I'm in therapy, just so someone can treat me and help me get through this. But at the same time, I want to be able to help other people. And I want to
Yeah.
learn. I went back to school to relearn certain concepts and theories. And I want to be able to kind of verbalize what happened to me and help other people eventually. I was gonna say that I felt so crazy.
Yeah.
And I felt so crazy. And when I started being on threads and just putting my observations both from an academic and from, just a regular person's perspective, it's almost as if there are textbook clinical or pathological narcissists, there are actually textbook victims. And I'm like, wow. I mean, it's strangely relieving. I even,
Yeah.
tell them because it's like, well, first off, you're not alone. And second, that is concerning because you know what I mean? There's a price for knowledge before you barely talk about these things. And gaslighting just became a word. I think it was like 5 to 8 years back, if I'm not mistaken. And studies, started coming up, popping up. And so, yeah, it's like people are being more aware, but on the relational space, I think that needs more studies, more experiences, more content. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
just went
Yeah.
off.
Oh, thank you. Um, can you share a little bit? You mentioned you went to couples therapy, and
Right.
um, not usually the best idea when you have a narcissist in your relationship. Can you share a
Yeah,
little bit about that, just so that other people can know, like, hey, it's probably not a good idea, not a safe
not a good idea. Um, God, I was like,
idea.
not a good idea because there was a conflict that he darvowed, and then I already booked therapy, so he kind of like positioned it in a way that okay, we just go to therapy. I think we went to therapy just for him to kind of appease me. So we went. The way that we positioned our problem is like communication issues, like we just want to stop the fights and we just stuff like that. And then so there was a week because so I do have my individual therapy and we have a couples therapy, and it was my individual therapist who kind of gave me that realization. So she was coaching me. I
Hmm.
already told her that I was in denial, and she was coaching me like, how about you kind of create an experiment for yourself, you being a,
Hmm.
analytical person, you love experiments, and so there was a week that I didn't really quote unquote put up a fight, anything that disappointed me, anything, I just remained quiet,
Hmm.
just so we know the difference of how it will come up in therapy, right? And so that's what I did, but I took note that I was upset because he didn't take accountability for this and that. So anyway, so we went to therapy. Well, we went to therapy, right? And the therapist asked us, "So how was your week? How has your week been?" And we were like, "Oh, it was pretty calm and pleasant." And then the therapist said, "Why do you think that is?" And I didn't answer. I made like he
Hmm.
answered, "Oh, I think this week we had just been more mindful." And I'm in my head, no, that was me keeping my mouth shut. That's when I kind of like concluded, oh my God, this is gonna be the dynamic. It's only gonna be calm if I don't say something that doesn't come off as not a praise. So
Yeah.
basically, for them, anything that criticizes their behavior or basically puts them in the wrong, that triggers them.
Yeah.
Um, and so so he was out for his birthday. He there's this colleague that I wasn't comfortable with, and he hid that information from me. We were talking every day. We were talking every day, and I just had this, like, I don't know, feel. So I asked him, "Who are you with?" And that was the only time that he told me that he was with his colleague, with some clients. So of course, if I have all the right to think that, okay, maybe he hid it for something, whatever. And his reasons were, I thought it didn't mean anything for you, or we didn't have the chance to. It was all in me, right?
Right. Right.
And so we kind of like kept the conversation short in text. And then he told me that he was gonna call me. He did not call me. He sent me a text saying, "Oh, you seem busy." It was, again, it's like he decided not to keep his commitments because I made him do it. That's like the summary of like how it usually happens, and that makes it my fault, right?
Um,
Um, Come Saturday, this is very important. That's why I'm telling you. Come Saturday, I asked him, can I send you an I statement? So for everyone who's listening, I say it was like part of our couples therapy, where if you want to share your feelings of frustration, you started with an I feel blank when blank, So,
mhm.
and then he said yes. It was a busy week for him, right? But he said yes. If someone says yes, then you send it. I sent it. It was a note, a voice note. I was crying. I was kind of like frustrated, but it was a clear voice note. I even had the script. I had my individual, like my therapist, check it. Do you see any accusations? Do you hear? Because every
Yeah.
time I say something to him, there's always something wrong with, like,
Mhm.
if my content is pretty direct, he would focus it on time, tone, accusations, passive aggressive. I'm like, and then of course by then you're already confused. Like, you don't even know how that sounds anymore. You can't even define what passive aggressive means anymore at this point, because it's just so confusing. You're just left in a fog. So anyway, so my therapist guided me. And so I created a script. And this was the first time I called him out. Like, I literally used the words, babe, I'm sorry to say this, but I see a pattern of you not taking accountability for your actions. It sounds strong, but this was the first time I told him. And I gave him case examples the week that I kind of like kept quiet. And it really gave those examples, like it gave a strong case, so to speak. And he reverted to me saying, your feelings are all over the place. I can't handle this, right? Feelings. It's not even, and then, oh, I hear you about the ego, blame shifting, blah, blah, blah. I can't handle this. I need space. So I respected it because I'm on my way to being secure, right? I said, okay, because he was coming home the next day. He came home the next day. I prepared for his like welcome party. Because again, it was his birthday week, and I prepared the kids as well. And so we were okay, like, I welcomed him and stuff like that. And then the next day, um morning, I asked him, oh, sorry, that night he wanted to talk about work, and I said, I don't really have the bandwidth, so I kind of like have to I don't have the bandwidth for now, for tonight, because I fixed something for you, and I kind of like used up all my resources. Can we talk about it tomorrow or something? And I thought he understood. So the next day I said, do you still want space? Let me know so I can so I know where to position myself. And then he said, the only reason why I'm asking for space is because of the space and the disconnection that you created. That voicemail, the accusation, this and that. You have to stay accountable for that. And that was the first time I said, I am not going to take accountable for that. You were the one who said I could send it. I sent it. So I resent out. And he said, well, in that case, I need more space. And of course, I have this side of me that, oh my God, I need to keep talking. But I never, like, I did not bend. And then he said, you're crossing my boundaries right now. I already told you, you can't talk to me. And you are making this worse. And until now, he hasn't acknowledged that I was upset for the things that he did. And then the whole day I did not hear from him. We only had 3 sessions, by the way. This was the third. I did not hear from him the whole day. That was like a punishment for me for not, behaving, I guess, in a certain and more for not taking accountability for his actions.
Yeah.
Went to couples therapy. And by then, I'm already reactive. You kind of like That is reactive abuse, by the way, if I were to kind of define that. Like you put someone in a certain situation when they're heightened because you withheld them of something.
Right.
And he withheld me of, I mean, he knew, like I told him I was upset and he just didn't acknowledge nothing. He pushed it on my emotions, right? And so I told him in front of the therapist that I was already reactive, this and that I was upset, and and I was explaining how I feel. The therapist, of course, the couple's therapist, if she has no clue about
Yeah.
him, he would think that I'm the one the therapist would naturally think that I'm the one who's unstable. So even the therapist said, okay, Catherine, I sense that you're very anxious, this and that, you know, and then of course him, that feeds him. So that therapy session, he started saying this. He started becoming the person who I've never met this version of him. He started, I mean, look at her. She's an emotional wreck. She's always angry at me. I can't stand her being angry anymore. She's so anxious, like she's so even jealous. Like he was literally doing this. And you know what? I recorded the conversation because I was that of a mess. I started recording conversations towards the latter part of a relationship because I had no clue which is real, not real. Am I overreacting, not reacting? Crazy. And I even had my therapist analyze that one. So anyway, I record that conversation and he kind of like me, I had been in this space, I had been in this, this has been my work. So he put himself on a pedestal, he put me down, he literally destroyed me. I think if I were kind of like to just summarize that.
Yeah.
And then he said, and I can't take this anymore. We break up, something like that. Now, the reason why I have to tell you this, why um, it's not a good advice to actually go to therapy with a person who happens to have subclinical or pathological narcissist, because you are dealing with a person who has the lack of insight. So the way that they position themselves in therapy is how they believe they are. They
Yeah.
don't know themselves that they are working from a space of self-protection.
Mhm.
So if they believe they are secure, if that is their attachment style, they will project that they are, but they're not. So
Mhm.
even the therapist, if they have no clue about this person's history, will perceive it as something else. And when you don't really know the problem, you end up giving a wrong diagnosis. You learn this in healthcare, you learn this everywhere. So that's usually what happens. And the therapist would end up like taking sides based on just what the information, the available information right then and there. So for me, one reason why it's not a good idea is because you already mentioned it earlier, narcissists don't communicate. That is a problem they have to solve on their own. Two, it makes it worse. Like it makes it worse. Like it makes it worse in a way that now there's like three of you,
Yeah.
and they have a way to manipulate the therapist as well, especially if the therapist isn't aware.
Yeah.
And third, it doesn't solve anything. You cannot fix this. You usually go to therapy thinking that you can fix the problem, but I think we forget that you can't fix a person.
Mhm.
And you think that just being in therapy does that job. It doesn't. So those are the three things I could kind of like share my takeaways for why it is not a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. And just the way that he was able to position you to become the identified patient, for lack of a better term, of like,
Yeah.
she's the problem. And it diverts the work in therapy and
Mm.
creates a distraction. But also, yeah, he gets an ally where now, because the therapist has said, I'm sensing anxiety in you, let's work on that. Oh, now he's got somebody in his corner and can reinforce that idea that you are just being dramatic and overly sensitive when you're not in therapy. Uh,
Right.
yeah. But I'm also hearing like how important it was for you to have your own personal therapist who had knowledge about narcissism and was able to identify it. It seemed like that
Right.
was a huge support for you.
And it's I only went to therapy because he told me I have to seek professional. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And because I believe in therapy, I believe ever therapy ever since. So I went.
Mhm.
And I just also wanted to share that he doesn't.
Yeah.
He doesn't think that there's anything wrong with him. So even for us to go to therapy, I ask him three key questions. Can you accept the fact that you're not meeting my needs, which is, the emotional, that part? Do you think you can be helped? And do you want to be helped? I ask these questions. to my then partner. Oh my God, it took us like over 30 minutes because all he did was just to justify, and just, no, I think I'm doing well, like doing that. And then it's
Yeah.
it's crazy. And in that conversation, it also became my fault that it took that long
Yeah.
because I raised it. So it's a trap if you think about it. Like you don't really have a way out once you kind of figured for yourself that you're in that kind of relationship. It just so happened that he discarded me.
Yeah.
And that's that's why I was set free, so to speak. But to be honest, if he didn't, I'd probably still try, which is kind of weird or strange. I was that of a mess. I want to share that when we broke up, so that same night, um, I was still mourning. He even said, "Oh, you can stay at home, figure out your life, fix your things for as long as you need, because I want to be kind and we could still sleep in the same bed," which we did. And I was still mourning, so I was like close and all. But past 12, my body started shaking. And I'm like, this is not right. You know what I mean? Because now I have confirmed that I literally am sleeping with the enemy. Because my therapist, my individual therapist guided me through it. Like, if you really want to know, that's why I ended up doing that route, right? Like I called him out once, I did not bend. And basically my therapist said, if that's what you're gonna do, more likely a discard. Well, actually, that's what happened, right? And that also confirms that I had been abused. So I'm like, oh my God, this feels so wrong. And then so I just took off. I told him I'm gonna stay downstairs. I'm gonna clean up my things, and I just tried to avoid him ever since. But since kids were involved every other week that time, I really had a hard time kind of, being okay with it. And so I kind of like, you know, I was angry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't really recognize him, but that also triggered him. Like he wanted this hi, hello. He wanted us to stay friends in front of the kids and us to kind of like project an image. And but even when the kids weren't around, he still wanted that. So I think it triggers them when you don't recognize them.
Yeah.
That's at least one thing I can say. So
Yeah, and that's one of the things about narcissists is their deepest wound is shame. And, they come across as grandiose, but really it's that shame. And that's why they're looking for you to validate them and make them feel good
right.
all the time. Yeah.
I think I just felt like sharing that last bit because, for some people, when you kind of like evaluate your actions the way that I did right after that breakup, I'm like, what was I thinking?
Mhm.
But you're already in that state where you can't even think. You're already in a fog. And I think I just want to normalize that because I was very confused. Up until now, I bring that fog with me, by the way. It's one of those symptoms, I guess, when
Mhm.
you end up being in some form of trauma. But I just want to say to everyone who's listening that when you feel confused, when you feel like you have to record your conversations, when you start questioning yourself, when you start even because cognitive dissonance comes from like, a clash of beliefs and thoughts and values, right? Then more likely you're in a pathological love relationships. That is the clinical term that we use. And you could either be in a narcissistic abuse, psychopathic abuse, or toxic relationships in general. Those are the terms in pop psychology. So I just want to make
No,
that clear.
thank
It's
you.
normal. Yeah.
Yeah. As you look back at yourself when you were in that relationship, how do you feel toward yourself now?
Oh, you know what? It's pretty fresh. Like I think I'm 6 weeks out.
Hmm.
And my coping mechanism has always been rationalization in a healthy way. This is not to suppress my feelings, it's to balance it out. And that's why I went to school and in therapy.
Hmm.
I want to educate myself, like, but also acknowledge that emotions are healthy. And I guess if I were to answer your question, there's still shame in me. Um, there's still shame and anger and confusion, and I acknowledge those feelings. It's normal.
Hmm.
Um, I have to, I think, but that's not something I encourage, of course. I think, I
But
mean,
it's
the
normal.
reason why I ended up being in your podcast is to kind of give an idea of how it feels to be in that kind of relationship, how it looks like, right? And right now, I feel shame, anger, sadness, still love, which I'm trying to like rationalize. But when I was in the relationship, I pretty much felt the same things. I
Mhm.
pretty much felt the same things. The only difference is that right now I am on my own. I and that also means that I have the power to do something about these
Mhm.
emotions. I had been telling, I guess, my friends, my colleagues, people who actually listen to me, that between sadness and anger, listen to anger, go for anger. And I'm not talking about rage.
Mhm.
Sadness keeps you where you are, and sadness keeps you where you are, and anger brings you where you're supposed to go. I did not pay attention to that emotion when I was in that relationship, and now I get the chance to, and that's why I'm here. I'm doing therapy, I'm in school, I'm educating people. I'm accepting the fact that I did not see that. There's so many things going on. And so if I were to kind of answer your question, you can feel the same emotions during and after, but it's what you do with those emotions that count.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's so important. And even just to hear you talk about your anger as, it's my guide. It's going to show me the path forward, and I need to listen to it, instead of having this fear around it and suppressing it.
Right.
But yeah, I'm hearing just like, yeah, now because I have removed myself, there's possibility for movement. I can move forward now and do something with what I'm feeling.
So
Yeah.
that's where I am right now. So,
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate just like you giving a window
mhm,
into what reality is on the other side when you've just gotten out.
right.
Um, when you are, going down this road as you've been and the road feels very long, what do you hold on to keep going?
Um, honestly, okay. Everyone knows who Dr. Ramani is. She's a renowned
Mhm.
expert in narcissistic abuse. And there was this video that I watched. It was with her and Lewis. I think Lewis is his name. And currently, it's already been okay, so it's been about 6 weeks since that breakup, and I still have dreams about him every night. And I have hyperphantasia, and that means my memory about certain things, it covers all five senses. So if you ask me about a memory like 5, 6, 7 years ago, and that memory, it's a memory that I hold on to. I remember everything from
Mm,
how your voice sounds, from what the smell is. So of course it's stronger for me, right?
mm,
The effect is stronger for me when I dream about it. The difference is that, sometimes I would wake up feeling sad, hopeless, fatigued. So I carry that feeling whenever I have certain dreams. So what motivates me is to be able to say that I am able to not forgive someone. This is what, at least what I kind of heard, and I stand by it. You can actually sleep in peace and not forgive someone for what they did. And if there's anything that kind of, gives me a little hope for me to carry this road, it's that. Because right now I still have something in my sleep, my
mm,
dream. And I want to be able to reach that point where I no longer have those dreams, that I could sleep in peace. But knowing that there's this person, first off, you give apologies to someone who issues it. He never. So that's one. And second, you can be okay with that. So I want
mm,
to be able to reach a state wherein I am living my life in a peaceful way. I am sleeping in a peaceful way. I get my peace of mind. So much peace is in that word, but without any piece of him in the picture.
mm,
So
mm,
um, I just want to be, that's kind of like my gold standard, if
mm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's because I hoped that relationship would give me that sense of safety and peace, but it didn't. But it also means that, at the end of the day, we are the ones who assign labels to people, to feelings. I mean, this is how we end up having dictionaries or science. And so if I ended up associating safety with him, I have the power to take that back.
Mm,
And so I want to be able to say that in the future, I get to keep that sense of safety to myself, and I'm able to also delegate that to someone who's like more worthy.
mm,
When I say worthy, this is best judgment. Now I'm in therapy. Now I'm healing myself. I'm also in class. You know what I mean? Like I will do
Mhm.
everything in my power to kind of like feel safe again within myself and with someone.
Mhm. Yeah, and I hear an element of trust in yourself that you will do because you are a doer. You will do the things you need to do to get to a better place, and there's a commitment to yourself there, I think I'm hearing.
Right. I'm pretty like, yes. No, I was gonna say I am pretty committed. And I think I placed that sense of commitment when I was with him. I was so committed to making him happy, to making it, in order for me to get that high. But you can create that yourself. I just forgot. I forgot about it because I was rewired eventually.
Yeah.
And I really want to get back to that. I want to come home, so to speak.
Yes.
That's what I'm
Oh,
working
what does coming home mean to you? Coming home to
on.
yourself?
I want to be able to go back to this sense of home. And by that, I mean, um, I told you earlier what it means to be me. I am independent. I am a doer. I love life. I love my space as well. And I wanna go back to that space or that state wherein I am my own best friend. I love my company to that point that when a person comes in my life, the competition is not between men, but rather between them and my space.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is home for me. Like I have to be complete and whole on my own. And whoever wants to get in or whoever wants to get access, you're not competing with other people, you're competing with my space.
Mm-hmm.
If
Mm-hmm.
if, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And I want to reach that. And for me, that is home, so to speak. It's
Mm-hmm.
being comfortable in your own skin, your own thoughts, not questioning your, of course, questioning is part of me, that I'm a curious person, by the way. So I always, that's also a problem with me. Like whenever I'm sticking to something, there's always like, well, but what if? And then you start researching again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's like a lot of things that I said, but
Yeah.
that kind of like
Yeah.
encapsulates it. Mm.
Beautiful. Is there anything that you would like to tell our listeners who have been listening to your story today? Anything that we haven't touched on that you'd want them to know or to hear from you?
I think a universal advice that I would like to give is to practice solitude.
Mm.
Um, Solitude is the ability to be able to be your own company. Just be. It's this has nothing to do with introversion in any way, okay? If you I was gonna say, when you practice solitude, you get to be mindful of your present. And when you are mindful of your present, you know how it is to just be. And
Mm.
that gives you a certain feeling. I don't think transcendence is the right word for it, but it just gives you that sense of calm. And
Mm.
when you practice solitude and when you end up having that sense of calm, that becomes your standard for what like that is what you are gonna look for outside, if
Mm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you kind of rewire yourself that way rather than looking for the highs, you look for something that's calm you.
Mm. Yeah.
So
Love that.
I think because this is a question that I have to think right now. So, and I think that's something that I would like to share. That is part of my self-reflections.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I had been used to the high in that
Yeah.
relationship. So now, if I were to apply that to my own life right now, um, I go to therapy, I go to school, I mind my own things, I fix, like, I want to see what's ahead of me. Um, there are things that I wanted to do in that relationship that I didn't, just because I was so mindful about what he would think, what he would feel, etc. Now I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna do it on my own.
Mm.
So, um, yeah, enjoy your cup of coffee, enjoy being on your own, enjoy reading a book, learn to need and love and care for yourself.
Mm.
Yeah.
Love that. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your willingness to just give us a window into what it's like and um even just the way that you normalized throughout this whole process of, hey, this is it doesn't feel good to admit this, but this is what's real. And it's okay if you're in this place. So thank you for, yeah,
Thank
just
you.
giving
Thank you as
people
well
that
for having me.
perspective.
It gives me also the opportunity to um, be a content on my own in order for someone to, maybe someone would hear it. It was like, oh, that's actually the relationship I'm in. And that also gives them an informed decision. What should I do about it? I did not have that. So that is something I would like to extend out there this time. So you allowed me
Mm,
to do that in some form. So thank you.
absolutely. And if people wanted to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
The best way is actually in threads, for reasons that I share my academic notes there, um, from, Venn diagrams to flow charts to. So I am currently in a narcissistic abuse treatment certification program. I'm also in therapy right now. I'm switching modalities. So anything that I learned from both channels, I share it there. And so for anyone who would like to reach out to me for questions or just to vent out to share, I think Threads would be a good venue for it. So I will be there and I'll see you. Thank
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
you for having me, Kirsty.
You are listening to the Trauma Uncomplicated podcast, where we untangle the ways complex trauma formed you and your relationships and give you the tools to get your grounded, true self back in the driver's seat. If you are ready to take that next step and dive deep into your healing, visit relationalhealingco.com, where we offer tools, resources, and personalized coaching to help you heal your trauma and thrive in your relationships. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered medical or psychological advice. If you are in the United States and you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please dial 988 to reach the National Crisis Hotline.